Hey, everybody. I'm just going to record a little lesson for you guys that weren't able to make it to class on Friday, September 4th. What we're going to do today is we're going to look a little bit at some intro stuff for Reconstruction in the American South. Reconstruction is a time period right after the Civil War. And basically, why it's important to talk about is it sets up a lot of the systemic racism and issues that we see in America with race. Because when slaves were freed after the Civil War, there were a lot of things left up to the southern states as to what they did. And they set up systems that didn't necessarily function the way that maybe most people would hope that they would. We're also going to do a brief review of what is history and why we study it. Don't forget that you have an assignment due. Today's, again, Friday the 4th. Don't forget that you have an assignment due by midnight tonight as well, okay? Now, goals for today's class, what we're going to try to get out of it is, first of all, we're going to try to define history. We're going to talk about what it is and why we study it. We're also going to talk a little bit about, some things about personal history and how they link. And then eventually we'll get into one slide about the Civil War. And last but not least, there's going to be some work time, or we had some work time to finish up our assignment. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with this really quick definition about what is history. And I threw some personal pictures on here because every person has their own history and every group of people has their own history. And oftentimes those can be connected depending on where you are, who you're around, and things like that. So there's 4 pictures on here. 3 of them I like and 1 of them I don't. And I'll give you a quick recap on each one fast. The first one, the lower left, that big dude in the yellow polo shirt, that's my dad. The person in the middle is my sister. And that guy on the right, that buff dude in the tank top, that's me in 6th grade. One of the things I noticed personal history wise from looking at a lot of the early pictures of my life is my mom was the photographer. And so my mom isn't in many of the pictures. The second picture, the one in the middle, that really, really buff dude in the Leave Me Alone t-shirt, that's me when I was about your age. That's actually my last day of 8th grade. And I'm there with my friend Joe, and we are getting ready to play some softball at recess. Yes, that's right. We still had recess when we were in 8th grade. That one in the lower right, that's one of my favorites. That is Cade and Phoebe and I at Bay Beach, and my wife is the photographer on that one. And we were getting ready to ride like the Ferris wheel and the tilt-a-whirl and stuff like that. So, good memories. The one on the upper right, though, that kind of did a lot of changing in my personal history. That is a former student of mine named Brianna. She's awesome. But she asked if we could take a picture at graduation, and then she sent a copy of it to me. And when I saw like how heavy I had gotten, I was like 255 pounds. I decided that I was going to get back into like doing some things to taking better care of myself and eating better. So what is history? It's a whole series of past events connected with something, someone, or even a group of people. So again, you each have your own personal histories. When you tell people about yourself, when you did that About You survey for me, you were giving me a personal history. All right, you were telling me something about your interests and things like that. When I ask you guys what you covered last year in history, I'm asking for kind of a group history from you guys. And obviously, we have a lot of other things we study. You guys have studied Wisconsin history, some world history, some world cultures. And so you guys have done a lot with history. So why do we study it? Aside from the fact that some people really like it, and the state requires us to, and the federal government requires us to. First of all, there's this lazy quote about why we study history, and I don't like it, but I get why it makes sense to people. And that quote is, people that don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I do understand how people that don't know what's going on can make the same mistakes over and over and over again. I really think that the reason that we study history is 4 things. I'll give you all 4 of them at once. And again, it's a really good idea to be writing this stuff down in a notebook. The first one is that we want to be able to identify trends which allow us to predict future events. For instance, two trends that I can talk about with you guys quick. With COVID, there's a holiday weekend coming up. Monday is Labor Day, and that's a big picnic and family get-together day and things like that. But what we found since COVID has started is about 2 weeks after every big holiday, there seems to be a big outbreak or increase in COVID cases. Happened after Easter. It happened after Memorial Day. It really happened after the 4th of July. And if I'm a betting man, based on what I know about history, I would bet it's going to happen again after Labor Day. The other prediction of future events, and you guys might not know this one, one. Generally, depressions or bad times in the American economy tend to happen about every 30 to 40 years. Some people think that we're in the start of one right now, and that would mean that, you guys might be living through one when you graduate from high school or if you go on to school, graduate from college. We also study history to understand like cause and effect. When we look at things like what's going on in the United States today with Black Lives Matter and the protesting and the things that are going associated with that, we can trace a lot of that back to Reconstruction, the post-slavery era, things that happened in the 1920s in America and things that happened in the 60s with like Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. So we can track things that this is the cause of this and this is what happened next. And so this is going to happen. It allows us to make sense of the world. It identifies principles that help make us the individuals we are in this place. You have formed a lot of your opinions based on not just what other people have told you, but your knowledge of history and the way things around you work. Obviously, when you take things like the protesting that's going on now, there's obviously 2 to 3 sides to the argument. Well, those people's opinions come from their take on history and how we got to where we are and how they got to where they are as individuals. History also allows us to communicate with people who are different from us. We learn how to find common ground because we have to share some amount of common history. We learn how to explain ourselves to people. Like, for instance, when you explain where you're from, you probably don't just say Marshall, Wisconsin. You probably say something like Marshall, it's near Sun Prairie, or, oh, Marshall, it's just outside of Madison, or, oh, I live in a small town in central Wisconsin. Not really central, south central Wisconsin. Because we know from past history that not a lot of people that aren't from around here know where Marshall is. And so we have to explain it differently. We know that when we're talking to people from Germany, World War II is something you have to discuss a little bit differently with them than you might with other people. Okay. Last but not least, a slide on the Civil War. Obviously, the Civil War is one of the dark points in American history. And it's one of the bloodiest wars, or the bloodiest American war, because everybody that dies and everybody that gets injured is American when you really think about it. It lasted from 1861 to 1865. That's a span of 4 years, which in terms of war isn't long, it isn't short. It's kind of a medium range war. That makes the Civil War the same as World War I, but shorter than World War II. But 4 years is a pretty long time when you think about it, because 4 years ago, most of you guys were in 5th grade. So think about that 5th grade class picture once and what you looked like back then. And 4 years from now, most of you guys will be seniors. Some of you guys will be college freshmen or military or out on your own. So 4 years is a long time when you think about it from that perspective. There have obviously been wars much longer and wars much, much shorter. Obviously, the Civil War pitted the North against the South, the Union against the Confederacy, the blue against the gray. And that obviously was won by the North. I had someone ask me a few years ago, well, who won? Well, think about it. The South was pro-slavery and all those things. If they'd have won, I think the country would probably look very, very different. The causes of the Civil War, most people, if you put them on the spot, adults, and you say, what was the cause of the Civil War? Most people are going to say slavery. They're not going to say states' rights. They're not going to say the right to secede. They're not going to say the South was upset that Lincoln won the election. They're going to say slavery. But you've got to understand that there's more causes than just slavery, and all those ones I just listed are potential items. The fighting style is very different than what we use today, but it was also very different than what happened long before this. In the Civil War, soldiers generally lined up in lines on open fields, and they would march towards each other with cannons firing, from behind them. But then when they got close enough, they would form firing lines. One line, for instance, may kneel down while the second line behind him stands up. And when they got about 10 yards away, they said, ready, aim, fire, and they just started to shoot. Because of that, the casualty numbers were ridiculously high, deaths and injuries, a lot of the injuries resulting in amputations. Medical care was not the greatest back then. And so if you had an amputation, there was a pretty high chance you were going to die from an infection. The Civil War was also a total war, which means it isn't just armies fighting armies. It is, if you're marching through an area in enemy territory, you might burn down their farm fields. You might burn their houses. You might loot their stores. You might shoot the cow in the field because they could get milk from it. You might burn the cotton field because that's how the economy works. And so it was like going after every part of someone's life. It would be like if you take If you have an enemy, instead of just being rude to your enemy, you're rude to their little sister, you're mean to their parents, you break the windows in their house and things like that. That would be what total war is. It does leave the South in ruins because most of the war is fought in the South, and the Northern Army spends a lot of time destroying things in the South. The most famous case being Sherman's March to the Sea toward the end of the war. The Union is led by General Ulysses S. Grant, and Abraham Lincoln is obviously the president, and the South is led by Robert E. Lee with Jefferson Davis as the Confederate president. Grant was not the general for the entire war. The Union kind of had a rotating door of generals throughout the entire thing, but Grant was the most successful and the general at the end, while Robert E. Lee, who was from Virginia and felt a lot of loyalty to the North, but was more loyal to his home state, led the South. Now, the relationship between the North and the South is still really odd. If you've ever gone South, you know that things just feel a little bit different, that the lifestyle is a little bit different, and that there's still some hostility and bitterness about the Civil War and the outcome, and the fact that the lifestyle in the South changed so much. Okay, that's just a quick recap of what we did today. Now, remember to use your head and get that assignment done. It is due Friday by midnight, which is 9/4. If you have any questions about anything, please feel free to email me or chat me. I will do the best I can to get back to you as soon as I can. And if you're watching this, make sure and have a great holiday weekend. We'll see you on Tuesday for class, and I hope you're well.